So how's it all looking to you, folks? Another weekend, another week, another month, another year. Almost done with the year. Few less crickets out there, but not enough. You know, I get all these thoughts in my mind when I come here to start talking. There's so much to really say. A lot of it's just, as I keep looking out and experiencing people's response to what's in the world, there's lack of understanding. There's just lack of being able to put things together. We work off of a lot of prejudicial things we put in our own mind. We work off of the wounds that we've learned, and we didn't figure out how to get around that. And it's pretty much an obstacle to most of us. What's amazing for me to see is that we take the things I'm telling you behind the woodshed and we apply them. And I see where we can apply them. We see changes. We see changes happen pretty quick, even though that quickness is really deemed over like years, because the quickness happens to be that there would be no change if we weren't persistently pressing to get back what was stolen from us or occluded from us. We're not going to do that by making excuses about how ineffectual either we are or the thing is that we're addressing. The thing we're addressing is a crime. So we can make all the excuses in the world, or we can deal with it. We can do other things and not because it's really convenient or it's the way the system has brought us into the world that we are adapted into this crime, this criminal organized syndicate that seems to be pretty global. Still amazing to me. Or we can decide to start unplugging where we can and stop being vulnerable. For those of you on Pastcast or Prodcast, and then again the recast on Thursday at ucy.tv, this will be BTWRLM 231. And that's for the blogcaster. To be able to search it out in the future, you can get the links that I go to. You can read for yourself, or you can do further research. And I ask you to do that. It's no sense to me to read a lot of this stuff just to set up these notices to us that have a way to make context throughout our lives, and we can disregard what I'm saying here and just continue to suffer and be just whiners, or we can address the problem, see the problem developing, and learn, and we're going to have to create a new future that in some part does step back into the past, because the reason why they have us here is we forgot. We don't have a memory of how it actually was supposed to work. That republic, if we we shall keep. In the United States of America, the only place in the entire world and in history that did something. They put people in power of property. And then it established a government to protect it. And I know it doesn't look anything like that today. But that's the why of where we're here at today. It's partly how we have this caucusocracy. The excrement rising to the top in our governments, because we didn't keep any of that more pure. And so we all have our objections to what we see, and we throw down everything that comes along as it's not good enough, and we never do anything. Because we're always just whining about how bad it is. We create our own little fantasy worlds in order to it would be better if it was like this. And if I listen carefully to some people, they don't even understand the history of what worked. And they're willing to throw that away too. Like the proverbial, if it was in the Proverbs, the baby out with the bathwater. We're not holding on to really anything, and we're not asserting anything. And I think I see it happen again in one of the chats. There's just no basis from which anybody works. It's a bunch of misinformation, lack of understanding, lack of application of what's going on. We walked ourselves into decisions that we made, and we found later that it may not have been so good for us, and then we're confused by that. I don't say this at all as a judgment. It's a fact, and you better get a handle on that. So I've been, again, trying to show us as we go through this, the future that they want, that we're told that is planned for us, is the one we have to avoid. Otherwise, your life is not your own. And for those of us that are older, we're not going to have much to worry about. Although we may get a tail into that. You hear stories now that if you want your pensions, you better give up all your info. Well, if you're not listening behind the woodshed, then you don't have an idea how to attack that. And I give you the tools about that. Does it mean you win? No, but at least when you go to the public and you make your case in the public record, and you position it just right, you start showing that the system is the criminal. And you might actually get a little more so-called sympathy from the mass public that you are now educating. It has nothing to do with the justice of what you're doing, because it was injustice to start by the very people in the government that were attacking you. And I don't see why people don't get that. They think you go into the system to prove the system, that you rely on the system. You're not relying on the system one little bit. You're exposing it. And people don't hear me. I'm amazed. I hear things, people coming out of people's mouths months and months and years later that I've said, it was on a news report, we were told about it, like it's new information to them. I just sit here and wonder, who's listening to what? And if you're not listening, why listen? I mean, if you're not going to do something, why even have a consideration? So I try to find the vulnerabilities to us that we can avoid. It's not an absolute. It's problematic because we're in an environment. It's sort of like the fish questioning water. I mean, you wouldn't expect that. Now, you certainly, when you pull yourself out of the water, you start realizing about what that water might have been, because then you stop breathing. Unless you're one of those guild creatures, kind of adapted a little bit different. Then you get to see, well, maybe a little bit different what's going on. You have a different perspective on the world. Then you have to choose whether or not you want to be the one that lives inside or outside the control. And we aren't even in that control. So when you find that out, you become totally free from it. But you realize that there's a criminal against you, a criminal in the world. And that's just been the history of man. So now we have this digital world, we have the economic, the fiscal world, we have the code world, the all kinds of control world that we're living in, and it was up to us to keep it off. And if you look very carefully, there is the threat of that out there to be able to resort to. But no one seems to want to do it. And I don't understand why that is. I'm thinking, as it occurs to me, I think Cowboy Tech put in a new video from Jerry Day. And he's doing good work about bringing people together with the other woman that told you about your so-called driving by right. It's really, I deem it a little different. It's the grant of use of the highway. And it just seems that everyone explains the condition, but no one knows what to do about it. And they're going to do they're taking the next step to try and show you how to remove yourself, but no one explains what the alternative is. And if you don't, I've told you this before, if you don't have an alternative to go to, then you can't move, and you can't show how the one attacking you is a criminal. Well, I try to explain fairly often as I can without making it too boring, the distinction between motor vehicle code and a grant of the use of the highway. It may not sound like much, but once you understand that, and the foundation of it, lots of more things come clear to you, and you realize how to identify these criminals that look under the color of authority, which I tell you, in your laws, should be a felony, and if it's not, it's a misdemeanor. It's a crime for someone to use their official capacity to undermine any right, remedy, property, possession that you might have. And so if you can't identify that foundation for yourself of what you are, who you are, what you own, that you might be owned, and how to identify that it's been done to you or you did it to yourself, there's no chance to fix this. And so keep the prejudicial views that you have, and maintain your indignance, or find out what's happened and undo that. Now, they're planning to tell you the thing that Jerry Day was talking to, and how to revoke and make distance on this so-called corporate state. That typically, I've told you over and over for years, it's done by application. They focus on the signature, and then they talk about revocation. And I'm telling you, be careful about that one, because what you need to do is rescind the signature. It's not just a simple revocation. You have to rescind the authority you gave to apply that stuff to yourself. It's a status shift that you didn't know what happens. It happens in your land. It happens in anything else that you eventually have someone else dealing with you on that's not supposed to be in dealing with you. And when you have that, then you found there's a document somewhere that has probably allowed that, or a presumption, which lots of people miss. And Australia, in the freedomsnetwork.com website, That's what I haven't responded to the question, but there's a question in that I responded to on the Jerry Day that don't forget about the presumptions that the system puts on you for your benefit. And a lot of people, what benefit is it? Well, you don't understand how this whole situation is, so your question's kind of inert. You don't understand. So you're going to have the question. The problem is you need an answer. And the presumptions of how this works to your benefit is how they've partly done it to you, and what you're complaining about that's invisible to you. It's the harm is transparent to you. You can't see it. If you can't see it, you can't fight it. So that's a long way to go away from us plugging in the silent weapons of quiet wars. They got us in a system that we've born into, and we didn't quite understand about it. And then you have no example hardly anywhere of its non-existence. In other words, everything you do is correct. The government's always right. And yet you feel that, and you see the harm being done. You say, well, that means that the result can't be right, which means their definitions, their reasoning to you can't be right. In other words, what I've said before, when it stops making sense, you better go find out how to make sense of it. So you don't need to go any further. Somewhere it came off the tracks. And so you have to track that back. Not on your perceptions, not your opinions, not your beliefs, but really what happened. And where we find this country, United States of America, was dealing in property and contract. That's how you find out what's going on. They deal with, in the Jerry Day video, they deal with this application, this status shift as a revocation. And what it is it's not an imposition, it's an application. So you have to understand that little distinction. It's a nuance. But if you don't get that, you miss it. You miss the whole point. It's an applique. I told you stick it to yourself. It's an applique. And they just accepted what you asked. And so, not to say don't go look at Jerry Day's video or what CT had put in. What I'm saying is start to have a brain in your head that works. Qualify everything I'm saying, but understand you better qualify what I'm saying instead of just moving on forward. So we've done a lot of contracts. We've done a lot of things in the world that we've asked for this pain and this suffering. And it's suffering because we continue with it. We don't put it off, and we'll rather whine about it instead of actually working to take it down and end it. And there's tools out there to do so. And when you've done the tools and there's still an obstruction, that's the criminal. Now you're not using the system. Now you expose the system for the crime that it is. And our problem is, as we've told the mass of educated people, must keep vigilant to keep that republic and keep that liberty, so-called. But when we do it to ourselves, they work on not only it's beyond presumption where you've signed the paper. It's not about revoking the document. It's about rescinding the signature for the reasons that are provided for in the law regarding signatures and rescissions. And you have to go read about that. Now, to direct you, and not to get, some people get all wrapped up in this and too tight sometimes, you can go find the guidelines for that in the UCC, under rescission. It's written for you to follow. As I say that, I'm completely off my tabs. This is the same problem when you have a property right that's in you and gets invaded by somebody. Do you even know, for all y'all that study the Constitution and read it and think you know it, do you even know how you're executing it to execute the remedies that are built into it? Do you even know that your remedy is a petition for injunction? Do you even know how to write one? And I'm asking these rhetorically. I find that most people don't. And I've had a couple of problems why it's even coming up. I have people that are working, are violated by presumptions and don't even know how to move a collateral attack against a government official who's really a felon. And I've talked about the injunction. That's one of the easier ones in a way. Your facts should be pretty clearly able to be supported by it. It's only 4 points on a letter, essentially a letter. You get the 4 points and you say them correctly, you have yourself an action in equity. But how many people know how to do that to protect themselves? I think very few. And I'm saddened because it means that we're not going to be able to get the message out of how bad things are because everyone just works on their whining and their incapacity and their woundedness. That doesn't mean, I'm not saying everybody's doing it, but there's not that many coming correctly. And I see evidence of it all the time, that people don't even know how to situate their problem. And at that point, how are you supposed to defend yourself if you can't even situate your own problem and find the foundational points of it? I don't understand how. So, those are the presumptions that work against us. Those are the things that we opt into, but there's another thing that's happened that you were born into. So there's another aspect. There's different levels. And it came pretty clearly, a bunch of different dimensions of this come clearly in this next tabs now, the notice to us of what the real problems can be. And that at some point, you are assumed into a condition that's so much more insidious, and that can affect you, like blindside you. Yet we know about it. That it came up here just recently, if you haven't heard of it. Credit reporting firm Equifax says data breach could potentially affect 143 million U.S. consumers. And I thought that was pretty interesting. First of all, you know you have the problem. You're vulnerable now in your so-called credit, which is debt. You're a debtor. If you're considered a status of a United States consumer, you are a debtor. You cannot be a sovereign. You cannot be someone who has a decision to make. With relative to your financial status, you are subject. And you're subject in the status is that you'll be imposed upon. You will be that so-called citizen of the United States, the U.S. person subject to equal rights, the right to pay exactions of every kind. 42 U.S.C. Section 1981 in the Code tells us all about that. I want to remind you that where financial considerations are, we go to 28 U.S.C. 3002, I think it is, and you'll find the government now is in the position of a corporation or its agencies. So we are dealing in a sub-world just by those two provisions. So Equifax says there was a data breach. This is a very devastating breach to any of you that are in Equifax. Now, who is in Equifax? All U.S. consumers. Who are those? I can't even tell you the extent of that. The population of the United States was about 324 million in 2017, according to Census Bureau estimates, which means that Equifax incidents affect a huge portion of the country. By that Census Bureau estimate, now I've talked to you about the census and the people that came to take the census. We've been through this over and over. In fact, it's been so long ago I can't remember what I suggested to you to do at the time. But that's a Commerce Department function. If they just said the U.S. was about 324 million, the entire population is conceived and presumed a U.S. consumer. This is a whole other thing we've been born into as a presumption against us. Equifax said it discovered the breach on July 29th. Criminals exploited a U.S. website application vulnerability to gain access to certain files. I really don't want to get too much more into the fact, just let you know that Equifax is one of three credit information supply services companies, private. They have information from all sorts of places. One story tells us of the problem. The next story adds the extent of this Equifax's reach. Equifax is one of the three nationwide credit reporting companies that track and rates the financial history of U.S. consumers. The companies are supplied with data about loans, loan payments and credit cards, as well as information on everything from child support payments, credit limits, missed rent and utilities payments, addresses, and employer history, which all factor into credit scores. Okay, where did this company get the right to suck all this information, whether or not you knew about it? Was it ever disclosed to you that when you got a job as a master-slave relationship, employed by somebody, employment, that this information is going to this private company? And you now, by your job, are deemed to be this U.S. consumer. That even your missed rents are registered. Where was that mechanism? So here's an environment you've been born into that hardly anybody is not a part of. And it's a public-private partnership already. This is not new. These public-private partnerships under the UN haven't been just invented in the last 40 years. This is how this system works. They figured it out, folks. They figured us out. And you're just born into this system, and you will take on what you will. A lot of these things are done with your signature or your contracting, tied to systems that are subject to that bigger government system. And nobody understands or takes the time to figure out how to be distinct from that. Even though the evidence is there, as I was trying to, one of my criticisms of the information that Jerry Day was doing, is they tell you about the problem, and they tell you how it's not right, and he's right about all that, but they don't explain to you even one example that shows you the bright line distinction that says, well, here's where they are, and here's where you are, given you stay over there in your actual non-dependent distinction between the whole here, this U.S. consumerism. Consumerism, in a term, it explains it's a financial construct. The government at that point is strictly a corporation to do a back proof. The problem here, just to let you know, is that the Equifax is a nationwide credit reporting agency that has tentacles into your life. It's a private company that affects your credit rating, and in that world, that is your existence. If you don't have that, in fact, I understand now, even where do you go when you go to get a place to live, they will look at your credit history. So it's a reverse proof against someone outside of the system. You are completely controlled by this. They've had a data breach. I wanted to point out the fact of the breach. In other words, your electronic data by these companies is not secure. And this goes to everything in digital, everything in computers. Anything that revolves around your life is not secure. If the NSA tools and CIA tools weren't enough to tell you they will never ever be secure, and now they've gone into the wild so that anybody can have them to cover all tracks from everybody that would have any authority, that would have had to be constrained by any law, you've watched the decimation of your protections under the law with the tools that have come out. That even allows any one of us who, if we were into it, to go attack somebody else. They're handing us the tool to destroy ourselves. But more importantly, they're handing this system, this Equifax, was vulnerable and didn't protect you. My problem with all this for all y'all is that this is the future you're walking into. This could happen to you, and then all of a sudden your life is destroyed, and you had no real say about that. And if you're not cognizant of what that system has done and does, when that's the only thing you have to rely on, your life is now controlled by that. And so those of you that think you're free and all this other stuff, and you're working toward liberty and all that other stuff, you're eliminated from that capacity. You will be fighting against this, and you have no real position in it. You're dealing in corporation. You're dealing in profits. You're dealing in how they manipulate and make money move by the digits, the fiat, so much as the fiat is considered. It's how that system runs. So as long as you're tied into it, you're vulnerable to these hackings. My other problem with this is that you don't know now. This should be your bag of facts. You can't know that your files haven't been hacked. You can't know that you're not being adversely affected on something they didn't find. You can't know that somebody's not messing with you in the background, and it's kind of agreeable. You don't know that the government, who has all the money in the world on your back, if you want to talk to you as you being the full faith and credit and a beast of burden, that they can pay any company to hack you and make more profit that way than to keep you private. You're seeing the deficiency in this system that the whole of society has been walked into and is walking into. It's not just about the applications of the signature. There's a system that you're born into that takes advantage, exploits you. They talked about the hackers exploiting Equifax. Well, the stories comes out not even a day later after the Equifax CEO comes in and says, "Oh, we're sorry that this happened, and we hope you don't take we're not defined by what happened to us, but how we respond." Well, they responded. Equifax is trying to make money off this massive security failure. It came out not even 24 hours later. The criminal hacker exploits. Well, now Equifax is exploiting its customers that were hacked and caused these entities called U.S. consumers. And they offered a free service to protect and watch for the accounts now of the 143 or so million. They should have been doing that before, but see, they don't. You could pay for more to protect your record and have notices sent to you. Well, now they're going to offer a free service, they call it. But when you read, the people who have now studied this, read the free service, it's only for a year. It's like a trial thing. And when you agree to that, you give up your right to sue Equifax. And so when you look at the totality of this, you get stuck in the credit system, which means you're a debt. You're a debtor. That's it. You're done. You're not in control about anything. And if you don't understand how to break the presumptions or avoid the assumption, you will be treated as one of those. That even after the hurricane strikes you, then the company comes in to exploit and harm you a different way. There's a completely other type of problem that, you want to argue with me on some of the things I say. You're missing so many other details and dimensions on it. If you don't get a proper understanding, there's no way you can defeat any of this stuff. That if you're in this situation, my question would be then how do they know that someone's not a U.S. consumer? And if they have information on you and they don't have anything they can show as a private company that you've agreed where they had full disclosure to you, aren't they now invading your life? And isn't there a way to get rid of these things? I cannot believe that their free trial period exploiting you in the harm they caused to you is some relationship you want to continue. I can't believe you, under this notice of any computer problem, this is Equifax, there's all kinds of different computers, systems that the government uses, that you could agree to continue and allow to have continued these records that may be tied to you. I'm offering this as more evidence of the totality of the plunder upon people. Never let a crisis go to waste, and the exploitation of the criminals. They said it right in the beginning. The criminals were exploiting. Well, Equifax is a criminal. It's exploiting. The thing it caused is the definition of what you're living under right now, whether it be from government, the companies, any of these, the non-NGOs. So if you don't start to look at these things in the methodology, and then hopefully you'll turn that and find out that methodology is just about everywhere else in the world as it's tied to the system. You will never be able to lay the foundation sufficiently to protect yourself from it or defend against it. You make excuses about how it's impossible, how there's nothing to do, and then you just do nothing. It's the digital fetal position. Argue with me is your digital fetal position. So they exploit it. They come up. They say, "Okay, we're going to give you a trial." Then they're going to. You also have to give them a digital account so that they can start charging you at the end of the trial period. And the most important thing is they stick you in this arbitration. This is the dispute resolution. I told you it's a felony against you. Corporations use it in all your contracts. It's in your phone contracts. It's in all your typically in all your major utility contracts. That they take away certain rights in favor of a forum that is favorable to business. So we do it to ourselves, and then I'm trying to show you this U.S. consumer status is something that's been developed, and you can either agree with it or don't. And they are now treating you, if you've been affected by the 143 million, and there was a whole lot more that weren't affected, 324 million of you that they're calling to be U.S. consumers, subject to these vulnerabilities. You really shouldn't be okay with that. So what do? Well, you're going to have to figure that out. You've got to go find out who these people are, whether or not you're part of their database, and then you're going to have to take them to task and say remove you from the database. And I'm going to tell you when you do that, and there's a way I understand that you do that. I can't remember what it is right now. It's not coming to my mind. You're going to be finding out the type of world you actually live in. I keep telling you, Syria and the land you see destroyed over there is what you live in all these so-called first world nations. You don't see that. You don't see the devastation. You pull yourself out of the illusionary system and can't take benefit from that system, and you'll see what kind of life you really live. You have to be prepared for that. They don't make it so easy anymore. You have to be prepared for that. And that's why it's going to take the mass of people. The more and more people that understand and actively move against and persist against this, it becomes a little easier. You can then rely on yourselves instead of being the single little mouse in the world trying to go up against the eagle. So Equifax becomes the criminal exploiting their consumers, their U.S. consumers, and everyone is now subject to this exploitation. And then if you don't involve yourself, now you're back to the hacking problem, aren't you? So they put you between the rock and the hard space. And you can whine about it, or you can just decide this is evidence of how corrupt the thing is, and you're not going to be part of that. And all I can tell you is now that I've told you that, you now are an accessory to the crime against you, the exploitation against you. What's your point about whining? If you don't stop it, what's your point to whine? If you hear about this and we're part of that and you understand, because most of us are in all that, and you don't go question about how you might be vulnerable and that a private company has your stuff wherever you go, all your private information, that they know they're selling it to remember the big data, since I told you the corporate big data is going to be worse than the governmental big data. They're selling that stuff to someone else. How do you think they got it? And who do you think is looking in on all this? Do you think all these people are the white hat Jim Dandy going to help to protect y'all? No, they're already telling you they're criminals. They're already exploiting the victims of their weakness. So if you don't get a handle on this little thing here as how expansive this is, and it affects you in all your life, and you don't really start to figure out where you want to jump in to stop something, I don't know about y'all. Anybody who doesn't, really. All I hear is a bunch of whining, but I hear a bunch of people want to argue against the conditions, but they don't want to settle down and do what it takes to figure out that there is a narrow path. And it's there to see. Once you're in my position, you see it. What you also then see is that how the criminals that are exploiting that. And that's a different problem. But until we get everyone to see how they're being victimized by criminals that come underneath the shiny badge or something, in earnest, I don't mean as an opinion, we're really not moving forward as a society to get back to something that we aren't going to suffer worse. And so we take on all these things in the digital realm. They've already made a straw man, straw woman. They've already it has no gender because it's just a legal account, wherever you want to go. I've explained a lot of this already. There's nothing really more to explain in the past broadcasts. I've explained how they do that. I've explained how to prove a negative, if you will. We can call that the negative. That straw man is not you. If they have it, it's not you. It is not there in the capacities that they say it is provable. But once they made the straw man, they can digitize that. And what do you think that they're dealing with? But they put it on you and you say, okay. Or you don't respond, which says okay. Or you whine, which says okay. And so they just get, based on these presumptions and the fact that you're a status that they can subject to this, and your lack of record evidence of non-consent, you have no basis to discuss anything. No, we give over to these like silent weapons of quiet wars. We plug in where they want us to plug in because it's so cool. And we get to wondering why they can control things that we know about, how we go, where we go. It isn't affecting people quite yet, although we're starting to see it. Like the woman back, in Europe or something? She can't get her pension unless she hands over more information of who she is? Because some bureaucrat doesn't believe it's her? I mean, that's the same problem I'm having here with the GoDaddy on a registry. I got to qualify who I am in order to get an account and run it for doing a website? Since when? This is what they're doing. Now you can't go get your pension because you don't give them your information because some bureaucrat's not convinced. I would just have to say, well, let's see if whether or not when I go to a court case and I put my signature on my complaint, if that's not going to be identity enough, that you're going to be found to be in problem when I decide to do that, because it takes a little bit of study and takes a little bit of time to set up the case. Because when I put a signature on that complaint by the rules of the court and judicial process, that's a fact. I can be held accountable for it not being the truth. And as soon as that happens, isn't that a self-evident proof of the wrongful imposition of the bureaucrat? Now, I think it is. Maybe you have a different opinion, but you're going to have to substantiate that. Most of you won't even think about it. You won't even listen to what I just said. 2 years from now, you'll come up with a statement that's something that you heard and it happened to be from me. And you'll think you originated it 2 years late. It'll be newfound information for you 2 years from now. And part of that is in your mind. Our mind just argues with reality. And I'm not saying this because I like it. I'm saying this is the reality. This is the problem that we're in. The story of Replika, an AI app that becomes you. The story of Replika, it's the name of the AI app that becomes you. So now they get you to speak to this phone app, give it all the information that you want, talking to you, it asks you questions, so you dump your guts out and your mind into this computer that then takes an artificial intelligence, so-called artificial intelligence algorithm, and starts to use it to sound like your best friend, which is you. I mean, I'm just sitting here, I'm stunned how slick these people are in getting y'all to participate. Now, a lot of you will say, I won't do that. Well, you're doing it in other ways, I guess is my point. But here, I told you this was coming. Here it comes. You're plugging in. They get people to actually do this. People, telling all the wonders already of the beta test, how great this thing is. You literally answer questions to it. It develops a persona around what you've said. But remember, don't forget here, remember when Israel came out and said they can make and plant DNA, they can fabricate and plant DNA that is you. All the other things that they'll have digitally understanding about you, and then they have this thing. If you're saying, oh, well, I'm not going to do this. Well, they're doing it like what we hear through your television, through your communications, through your chat. You don't think they're going into the chat rooms and have computers that can look at responses and come up with things, however erroneous it might be, to fabricate a fictional straw person, a digital straw person. And I keep telling you that then gets hacked or can be adjusted from the inside without anybody's knowledge, and then you can't prove it. This Equifax is kind of indicative of the whole problem in my mind and why I'm spending any time on it. It's within the fiscal condition, it's within the corporate condition, it's within the arbitration condition, it's within the control outside of your ability to control it. It's an existence that you had no control of in the beginning just by your mere existence somewhere in a record. You're looking at a whole life right there under control, created and controlled by another fiction that can affect your life. And I hear nobody really responding to this stuff. But how? Well, you find Equifax and those two other companies, and you say, how'd you have my information? How did I become your customer? See, that's the other thing I missed about that story. It talks about the victims of the Equifax security breach who sign up for the company's complimentary service will only get 1 year free. After that, unless they proactively cancel, they may have to pay. The terms of use say customers must have internet access and credit or a debit card to sign up. So you have to be tied to the system. Most importantly, they say customers. It's not based on the contract. The customer was established before the vulnerability affected you. Now, when did you become their customer knowingly, with full disclosure, and understanding what that relationship is? I don't know of anybody that knows of that. I think that's your first start. You are going to have to take charge of this. No one else can. Where do you start? Maybe that wrong will rise enough in your mind to be a wrong you need to make right. Maybe you'll start to research what it takes to fix that. Then you can be someone like myself who can explain maybe more particularly on that point. Maybe you can find a bunch of people that can start moving to do this. But as long as you don't, you're seeing evidence of a system that was created for you, that was plugging you in when you agreed that was you, that affects your entire life, can be hacked, can be adjusted, can be exploited by the people that are supposedly your companies as a customer. How would you like to be treated by a company that exploits you underneath underneath the vulnerability that they created? To me, this is just an example of other things that I can see work identical. And I guess that's the frustration, being that it's so clear to me, it's not transparent to me anymore. How is there such a mass apathy, mass victimization mindset in people that they would allow this to go on? That they actually are so needy that they need to speak to a computer app that someone said, I'm going to make an app. I'm going to get some more information from. They're going to spill their beans to me because I'm going to exploit their neediness to talk to a friend. And what better friend can they have than to talk back to themselves? That this Replika app is being handed to you to use, it to me is evidence again of the overt action that's coming, that the covert one that's been against you, you've missed. They've been getting your information all this time, no different than this app, wherever you went. You remember, they said it in Equifax. They were getting it from all these sources. That's not the limit of it. That was just some of them. And some of these records were not supposed to be used for that capacity. And when I say that, I'm to make it less of a cloud. What flashed in my mind was the property records for those that have patents. The county clerk's office has been converted to a commercial office. They don't even really accept certain things anymore. If you looked at what they don't accept, you'll realize what I'm saying. That they aren't supposed to use the records of people who file with patents. They're not supposed to impose a servitude of that consumerism on that property. No different than they're not supposed to impose your ad valorem status on that property for purposes of local tax. See, ad valorem is value added to commercial beyond what you were given a right to. That was controlled by the state. They don't have a right to attach that. The attachment is a felony. Does anybody understand this to go back and show how these people are committing crimes at every turn? The answer is no. It's why we're here. It's the app that becomes you. We're so needy, and we're developing people that are so needy. They want to speak to a real friend. It ends up being a program that is just responding as they would respond. How familiar is that going to be? That as you're doing that, like the phones already do in different ways, where you go, GPS following you around, takes your pictures, transmits the data somewhere, listens around what's going on, knows where you were, as far as even like the digital connections, knows who you were around, painting a picture of you, a false, well, it has to be false, it's not reality, it's a virtual, I hate that word, but virtual presence. And you think that's not being used for something. And then you say, oh, well, what am I going to do? Is our problem. That they're coming right out in our face and say, we're going to make a virtual you. And you're going to tell us who you is, and that you is going to convince you to let me talk with you while I'm on the backside as the company exploiting this information and selling it off to Equifax. So they can be hacked, or they can do the hacking, or they can exploit some more, and they can keep your life in a control. Why would we continue to do this? I don't understand. I don't get it. And I guess I don't get it because I decided a long time ago to make to just cut myself from it. Not perfect, but it's as best as I can do at this point. Hasn't been real easy, but it's been made easier by people who help me. Allows me to see a little more clearly what's going on in the paths that need to be taken. And people like Jerry Day and I forget the woman's name that was on, I talked to you, I think I did a video, part of a video from her. Those are people trying to step up to do things, trying to explain what their experience is. We need more of those people. We need more people coming together to make a bigger noise about the fact of the distinction between, if I can put it in the commerce side, the financial side, versus your rights as men and women in a country that was protective and not exploitive. And so, in this process, they're showing you that debt is actual currency. They call it credit, but it's debt. That system is being digitized. I talked about it a few weeks ago. Got a little bit of flack, but nothing real fully supportive in the counter. That the idea that they were pulling the blockchain in and the Ethereum, as I was reporting to you a year before that, was happening by the county clerks in the property and the monetization and the control of that service, like Equifax, in your property law. The adulteration of those records. You're watching this digitization of the world, this cashless society. And then I said, be careful, they're also going to do a double, at least a two-layer one. One's a national layer, and another one is the local layer. That just out of last week's broadcast, it comes out and focusing on the fact that China was pulling this off because they were given permission by the World Bank, and then that's through the IMF. And I think the World Bank, remember, has people, board members in the World Bank, I thought it was. I can't remember what I reported on this, but I mentioned it before. Fix it, whatever the error is. But the World Bank or the IMF directors are in the BRICS, Development Bank. That China was given the right to make the policy for the world regarding the transition from the system that was to the system that's going to be, and they were going to attempt to move everything to the SDRs, which is a long-term project, and then they showed and exposed the fact that they are considering the digitization of the system. Removing reliance upon the dollar on a global level so they can do this. Wasn't just a couple days after last week's broadcast, de-dollarization accelerates. China readies yuan-priced crude oil benchmark backed by gold. This was to me, a very, very big story. De-dollarization accelerates. China readies yuan-priced crude oil benchmark backed by gold. Very attractive. The thing is, this is a transitioning statement. This is why it became important. Because we don't see it here. We see substance here, commodities for commodities, which is proper. But it's within the BRICS system, it's within the World Bank system, and it's within where China is moving to digitize this whole system, as given permission by the World Bank to do so. And you need to understand the type of government, the type of system that China is, to understand what they're trying to do with the globe, the world, regarding financial systems. That we don't see it in this story, but that you're tied to digitally, that Equifax hacking exposes not only will you be vulnerable to the hacker, you're vulnerable to the services company themselves, and ultimately the governments. The world's top oil importer, China, is preparing to launch a crude oil futures contract denominated in Chinese yuan and convertible into gold, potentially creating the most important Asian oil benchmark and allowing oil exporters to bypass U.S. dollar-denominated benchmarks trading in yuan. You should be shivering right now, folks. de-dollarization, transferring, and bypassing the United States dollar-denominated benchmarks will cause the United States economy to suffer terribly, as what we've done in this country, the United States, against the world. Well, the chickens come home to roost here. That moving this into something of substance and tradable in gold gives it a very substantial trading option for people to move, an incentive to move into. That on its own is a neat thing to watch as far as going back away from fiat. But when you understand what it's a side step to get us to someplace else that's not as nice. It's more exploitive and controlling, then you start to see what I was talking about a few weeks ago about the conditioning of a blockchain into this thing. So this isn't just a story. This isn't just a saying, oh, China's going to do this and it's going to be this wobbly top. This is how they're going to make the transition. So much so that China has some real environmental problems, and because of their use of fossil fuels, but they're the largest importer of them. That doesn't stop China from also moving together to limit. See, oil's a transition thing. They've got to decouple a bit from, get around the dollar denomination. They impose theirs, and so they become more dominant, but it's not to end there. In the meantime, they have to reduce their use of the oil that is the transition point. And we hear coming out, China just, excuse me. Just went off something here. Oh, yeah. China just is now moving to impose the use exclusively of electric cars. That they're going to impose upon the car manufacturers to create just electric cars. They're going to diminish their need of gasoline and the distribution system for that. They're going to diminish their need of the very oil they're importing that is based on that can be based in gold. And so these couple of moves were pretty indicative of a real definite shift. This is not just some idea they're experimenting with. Remember, that experimentation happened, I think we identified that 2 years ago. It started to come into play here last year. And now they're moving in earnest to actually transform this whole thing on over. China's now, and you've heard this before, where more companies are going to go pushing for electric cars. I'm not so sure how good this is going to work. The point is, this is the government's plan in China, and they're on the forefront of the financial world structure and moving this thing around on the national level, not your level. Your level is probably not going to be seen too much. But to support this point, they're going to, at least on the vehicles, they're going to reduce their need of carbon. I don't mean carbon, but the fossil fuels. And that's a lie, too. It wasn't fossils, was it? But that's what they say. That in the help, in the BRICS side, in making this multipolar function in the world to make it look more balanced, and to be able to make more nations more equal as they move this into the SDR function of the national fiscal and monetary system. Russia plans to increase gold supplies to China. Now you start to wonder where, apparently those $3 trillion or whatever $1 trillion that China had, I told you they were going to start doing something in substance with it, in the commodities of it. They're taking these fiat currencies and they're dumping them into real commodities at this point in the transition. That Russia and China are working together to support China's bid to be able to support its oil contracts with gold to move around the dollar. This is a big deal here, I think. This is more than what I've been hearing being talked about. This is not just some mediocre attempt here. They're actually moving on quite a different number of fronts to solve some problems. They provide an incentive to actually move into their system. And this is like a privatizing system as well, if you notice how they're doing it this way. again, you get into that system and you're going to be controlled by it as well. This is no different how the plan works, but this is a more working on the global scale where we already know that China's moving to control, making a global control where they're going to use these cryptocurrencies and Ethereum contracts, whether or not they're named Bitcoin and Ethereum. I guess that was one of the things that was being missed. I'm telling you, it's in the world now that it can be done like this. And I told you before that when they go there, property gets destroyed. I don't care what the name is they put on this. This is the method they're going to use. That BRICS countries are considering own cryptocurrency as settlement mechanism came at the same time. It's just not going to be denominated in this gold. I mean, tradable in gold to incentivize it. It's going to also be tied to a cryptocurrency as a settlement mechanism. The BRICS Finance Committee is discussing a joint virtual currency for the five-nation bloc of developing economies, according to Russian Direct Investment Fund chief Kirill Dmitriev. While there is a focus on settlements in national currencies, cryptocurrencies are also being discussed as one of the possible settlement mechanisms. You hear just discussion, you think they're going to be just discussing it just because they like to hear themselves talk? No, this is the plan. They're moving through it despite this idea that it's supported by gold. That's an incentivizer. They're ultimately moving, and these countries are tying into the crypto system, as I was reporting before. And once you do that, you want to make sure you have a monopoly as a government. And what is China do in the news? It's all in the notice right here. You're watching the formation of this system. China just made a huge move against cryptocurrencies. So they're going to create their own, but they're going to destroy it and make it very miserable for anybody who has illegal in China to have and utilize other cryptocurrencies. Regulators are about to begin scrutinizing China's initial coin offerings, an industry worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, I'm real dubious on these ICOs and initial coin offerings anyway. They look like a big scam for the most part, and they're scammable. Every one of them, at least, could be. There's just no thing supporting it. It's just an electron that has a number. It's a series of whatever electrons it takes to make up the number is what you're dealing in. Now, I've already on record, I believe it's a cool tool, but it's also available, open to big problems. Notwithstanding that, whoever controls the blockchain controls this system. China is proving that to me, again, if no one else wants to believe it in me, that they are going to move against every other cryptocurrency to make sure they're the one that has the one in their sphere of influence. This is, again, at the national level. They're going to eliminate these initial coin offerings as far as their market trade platform situations to do this, how they do the monetization of the world. Now, just another article there you can read. I'm not going to read more. Based on that, Bitcoin crashed 8% when China came out against it. Now, I don't know really what relevance. 8% didn't seem like much. These types of fluctuations just seem to be natural in a way with the cryptocurrency anyway. The point is there was a direct response because it impacted people in China who may not be able to get and use those things, and those that are trying to work around the firewall, the China firewall, get prosecuted. And so China has been working for a long time. The purpose of that was to expose the economic interference that might come in that these cryptocurrencies would offer. You won't have the secrecy that the country can look in and see how this works. But they're going to get rid of the big ICO, the big initial coin offerings, which are in the marketplace, like Wall Street trading platforms. And so this is all happening at the same week. All this news came out at the same week. China is showing what's going to be the future regarding these cryptocurrencies and global trade. It's happening right in front of your face. When I tie that, the fact that you're going to be a digital number somewhere, and you're going to have your world and your personal data tied up in all this as well. And then you see the breach of Equifax, and then you see Equifax exploit its so-called customers that you didn't even know you were. If that doesn't paint a pretty dire picture to you, maybe we're not paying attention again. Maybe we're not listening too close. And if we don't start to see that and go back to a place where substance meant something to us, the law of the land meant something, that we know how to respond when someone comes and attacks us under a color of authority, then we are a done people on the world. Lots of people are done on the world anyway, but they're just in poverty, period. They don't work it out for themselves. Then they're exploited by outsiders like the United States government beating up on everybody in other countries. And we don't work this out amongst ourselves, people. We're doomed to this thing. And I guess we don't sense it as a danger because it's just sci-fi that you're going to be walking in huddled masses to your next, all in the same uniform, dusty uniform, to your next non-job. Just because people have to do something with you, and that all they need you to do is be to eat and sleep and use services, because that's how the system runs. You are the beast of burden. They don't even need your work anymore. They just need your existence. They just need to know about you. And you didn't take the time today to avoid the sci-fi movie of the future occurring to everyone. So Bitcoin responds to this move. China's making some very telltale things right now open that really need to be looked at as we see the transition, the transformation of a global economy. And again, it's easier for them to do the national side right now, and the people come a lot slower, and so we're going to have a tiered system at least. The SDR, if you will, digital cryptocurrencies will be running on the national level for settlements. You have to really understand how that's working, so it won't affect the people so much. They'll be able to play for a while longer, but once they get that worked out, it'll slowly over time, and the generations die off, and the memory about substance and property goes away. This same control system comes down into the people. And part of that getting you into that system is motivated not within China, that's being suppressed, but it's been encouraged in the Western side as they create the division that in the future will induce you into the system that brings it easier for them in the future to weld this whole thing together on a global area. That Australia, all in the same week again now, moves to legalize Bitcoin and attracts gold and bullion investors. They get you into this is electron currency, and they get you out of substance, which in some regard is not true either, because it's just paper contracts that are derivatized, and they're non-existent too. They already have your mind into fictions. A lot of you complain about fictions, and you're into this fiction. It's pretty fascinating to me about the fallen my psyche of people. We'll champion the Bitcoin, but we'll argue about the straw man. So the west side of this, the IMF side, says let's entice the Western people and investors into Bitcoin. On China's side, where the rules being made, the global rules being made, we're going to come down in complete control. And sometime in the future, we'll meld those two systems, is what I don't think people are understanding. And then you have another, again, in the same week, another style of control, evidence of a control that we see. Again, as I said, these cryptocurrencies can be tools. It depends on really who's wielding it and for what purpose. I've also said I think that it's interesting, given that you could put a cryptocurrency based in some production, I just say production. Partly in what I'm saying here, in this case, would be the production of marijuana. High value, high numbers of lots of volume work, that cryptocurrency based in the production of pot could work. I think that may be the best purpose. In particular, where those that production cannot enter into. You see this distinction again. You can't enter into that financial system, federal system, if you're a pot grower. And I don't know if people appreciate this, the clarity of the problem and the bright line that divides between getting in a system and getting controlled by it, or staying out and making your own. And even though I'm hesitant about the cryptocurrency, one based in production, for the purposes of the people that are producing, sounds like a viable idea. That the global banks, and you'll see the control of the United States here again on the production of marijuana, even globally, is far-reaching. And yet, I think that there's an answer. I asked Grimner, I said, why wouldn't this be an answer for the dope coin? That global banks sabotage Uruguay's efforts to legalize marijuana. It's hard to do business without the banks, is what it said here. And Uruguay, the first country to fully legalize the recreational use of marijuana, Uruguay, has suddenly found itself facing an unexpected obstacle: the international banking industry. Now, that just seems to be fascinating to me, the international banking industry. Well, you read the story, it ties back to the United States. It ties back to this stupid policy about, they say, marijuana, medical. There is no such thing as a medical marijuana. And I told you all that you all should have jumped in on the agency thing and made a mass statement about how there was fraud in the DEA and the fraud in the FDA about the lack of medical use, while they have patents and all this on its use, and the fact of the even anecdotal evidence to the contrary. And the fact that I said it's a produce of the ground, they have no right to interfere anyway, and that the produce to the ground to market's not commerce, and they don't have jurisdiction there anyway. I've given you a list, some of the list. There's more. That the commerce system banks can interfere with this is a very interesting insight into what it takes to be different than the system, and though that it can affect you. But that because you're distinct and they can only interfere, they don't have control, actually, except to the extent of their product, service, which is this money. That I think then cryptocurrencies might be able to be a thing, because all you need is something to transfer value between people they can trust. Remember, they just said China's relying on this as a settlement currency between nations. It seems no different here that the marijuana growers in Uruguay get together with a cryptocurrency they trust. Because there's no other efficient medium at this time. I guess they could go to dope coins and actually mint them, but then they'd be in trouble for the minting. The country could do that. That might be a little bit slow to get that to be done. That cryptocurrency, in this case, supported by its production amongst the producers of marijuana. And then, then you'd have to have a translation over to Bitcoin possibly, because that's the thing that's actually accepted outside this system. Could be an answer for this international banker imposition on medical marijuana in a country. They even threatened the sovereignty of the country to tell you how powerful this is. That to me it says, look, there's the dividing line. This is where you hurt them, and this is where they're trying to hurt you. That's the narrow path. That's what you have to sever. You have to answer that problem, because that problem is their plan. And so, while Australia is legalizing it to attract the gold and bullion to get you out of the substance or even the derivative paper and pull you into that system, while China's going to shut the door in the future, the global banks don't want to support production from the ground, Mother Nature, because that's where the real wealth is. And anybody who's been listening at all to the value of even the taxation money on pot in the United States, states that have legalized it, know the wealth that can be measured by the debt instruments that are trying to be transferred. In other words, they're trying to transfer Federal Reserve notes, which are debt instruments, and they actually mark the wealth that's coming out of Mother Nature from the ground. is this distinction I've been trying to have you identify, that I see here the answer if people would just step up for themselves. Does anybody else see this? A banking industry shuts down medical marijuana in a country. A country cannot defend itself because then it has other obstacles to that same money source. Is the point between wealth and debt. Is the point between control of your life, someone controlling your life, and no one controlling your life. You make up your own thing. In this case, I see validity in the cryptocurrency because it can be based in production, something real. And that's not neither here nor there between anybody else who's not in it, because all you have to do is find a medium for people that are in that industry. And if it has enough momentum, it has enough flow, it can spread out to other people, and that's just the acceptance of it. Again, the medium. The problem is who's going to control it. You see, when it goes to China, they're going to lock down everything. Well, if this is internal to a country and it's for a particular production, China can't control it, can they? If the state has already authorized it and they've been having their problems, and now the people that are in production do something distinct, like their land says they can, different than the government and not appurtenant to the government, then the government sits there as not someone that will attack you because it's agreed to the production, and it's also not affected on the economic side because it's not having to fund it. It didn't have to open up the banks to give the money system to the pot growers, because those aren't needed anymore. And so I don't know too much more about this whole thing, how this really works. It just seems to me we have a lot of people wasting a lot of time in legalization, when if we just got back to production and we got back to how that works, and we got back to systems that addressed that, and this is where gold comes and silver coin come from. It's still production, just in a form of a coin. It meant somebody's labor was applied to extract from Mother Nature what it had to offer, what that had to offer us, and put into use. And I think I see an answer right here, even though in my apprehension of digital currencies, the application properly of digital currencies. We also see what the law of the land is, and how production is wealth and not actually debt. It's a threat to debt. Why the industry, notwithstanding the pharmaceutical impositions and all this other stuff behind the scenes, but why the banking industry that's debt-driven, completely servitude-driven, wants to stop and will not and cannot actually get involved with this kind of production. And I say this because this is how we are presenting all production in the United States, at least. It reflects Uruguay when the government agrees that the production is lawful. It's no different than it granting what it granted in the United States for the use of the properties that it conveys to people through the patents. The production from the land. It was granted to people. That's not to be touched and interfered with by the government now. Essentially, it's given its okay to it in the conveyance. That's how simple this really is. What y'all don't realize is the fruit of that and the effect of it, because there's been this big theft. But right here is a major story. Right here with the Equifax imposition of a private company interfering with your life that you didn't even know was existing, even though you were told that didn't know how extensive it was. And then you see how it's being transferred into digital, and China's being involved in that, and they're using all these tools to kind of put the pieces out there in order to get you to be moving in the right direction. Then we come up with this little problem. When that system they're trying to create will target medical marijuana, which is actually production from the land, something that this fictional system can't support actually. It can just lend itself to the flow. And that's not even counting the fact that the United States is behind all this, and it's probably the biggest drug pusher through its CIA and other programs. So there's a big syndicate, organized syndicate problem going on that you see the bankings fronting that could be eliminated here in this case. Is this one example? I think there's many others, but it comes from the law of the land as production. It starts to show us where our rights as men and women are, if we didn't know it before. And if you didn't understand it that way, I'm here to tell you that that's the way you should be looking at it. And have I just mentioned utopia? No, it is not utopia. So until you get that understanding, you don't recognize how and where and why the criminal is sucking your life away and going to put you into a system, virtual, just a digital system that controls every bit of your life. You say, well, I don't do anything wrong. Well, you aren't in the decision of that. I keep telling you, you're not in the decision of what all that data that's being collected and all that systems you plug into. You're not making that decision of what that data is telling someone who wants to make you an enemy. And we see evidence of this. You get all this data, you get into the system, you get into a digitized life. You can only go through those systems like we found out Equifax. You can't even get the exploitation if you don't have a digital phone, a digital connection. You can't get into that system. Well, you've just defined that system as foreign to you and you shouldn't enter. But if you can't get into the system, you're not going to take the benefit. Once you do, no different than silent weapons of quiet wars, they let you plug in so they can use that data and potentially to exploit anything they need. You're handing them to that and you don't have an answer against it. You don't have a complaint anymore, notwithstanding your whining. We see the evidence of this other type of exploitation right here, where Israel uses social media crawler to detain 400 Palestinians without charge. Israel authorities are increasingly monitoring Palestinian social media traffic in order to identify potential threats. Recently, over 400 Palestinians have been preemptively arrested due to their online activity, and Facebook have approved 158 requests to remove content submitted by Palestinians on the site. That's just for Palestinians in Israel. And a pipsqueak of a place that's not even an actual state, has no real country, just occupiers in the land, unlawfully so, these Israel people, these Zionists, these political people. They now use the internet to go and target people and put them in administrative holds on a system they don't even really have lawfully. And do you think that's any different than the Equifax problem? Do you think that's anywhere where you've been born into this system? You're a U.S. consumer whether you knew it or not. You're part of that. Do you think that's any different than this? I don't think it's any different at all. I think it's just a matter of who's looking at what their question is about you. In fact, I look at this purging that's going on in the censorship in Google, and Grimner brought it up on Freaker's Ball about go to DuckDuckGo and in the start page. I've been using those for a couple of years, folks. I told you that a long time ago. Get away from Google. I try not to attach to anything to Google. Now, I can't do 100%, but I got blockers on my browsers, and wherever I go, I look first before I go, and if it has to do with Google, I don't go there. I find some other way. I take that much time to do that. I'm that sincere in attempting to do what I can to avoid giving them that company any credit. But the censorship might be a good thing, because now they can't stick you into a one-spot panopticon that you can be spied upon. We're having all these other places to go, and necessarily so now. Like I said, I'm on Minds.com. I don't know where that's going to go. It gets some good coverage. A lot of people view stuff. I don't know how much, but we got BitChute. That's another independent thing, peer-to-peer. Neat stuff. Not a lot of business there as far as people listening to the broadcast, but some. The point is that that's not underneath Google's scrutiny. They have to physically go look into that area if they can get into it, and have to do extra work. You're not in their system, and you just hand it all to them. They have to go find you. And then there's a question about why. And so you have a different object here that, again, you give them your information. Israel now uses this information to go after Palestinians without a charge. And what charge could they lawfully have anyway? They're just a group of people that pretend to be a state that have gotten the favor of the biggest bully in the world, the United States of America, and have handed them the nukes to be defensive against that and threaten everybody else to be little bullies.
and then they just kind of run roughshod to your witness as you see them do whatever they want with absolutely no accountability to anybody. The UN condemns their actions all the time, and you see nothing. So it's this big blah, 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 yakety yak. You don't see any accountability in the world anymore. But they can come and attack you through this. Now, you may not be a Palestinian, and you may not be an Israeli, but this is what they start to do when they are after you. The purge of the so-called alt-right, or anything that's not consistent with Google's sensibilities such that they are sensible, notwithstanding. They are just going to do this in that system. And so it's not about I'm not doing anything unlawful. You're seeing evidence here that someone who has absolutely no law and no authority in international law is using the same system to go persecute people. Because on their private unilateral determination is the problem I'm trying to explain here. You don't feel the threat because you don't think you do anything wrong. I've been telling you, it doesn't matter if you're doing nothing wrong. If someone doesn't like what you did because they're triggered, you're going to be in some trouble. I'm pausing to wonder, do you think about that? Are you arguing with me? Does it mean anything? I'm hoping it means something. I'm hoping it means that you're actually vulnerable, and it's going to take, in this day and age, no matter how much pressure they put on us, it's going to take a little bit more effort in order to start being those of people that are going to start throwing this nonsense off. If you watching this and allow this to happen, you're allowing injustice in the world. Why can you complain against it in yourself? You're just allowing. You're an accessory. Those that have the ability to interfere with this problem need to step up and do that. And I think about, okay, what can I do? And off the top of my head, I'm so overwhelmed right now. In fact, the last few weeks have just been terrible as far as trying to figure, all the stuff that comes at people and all the ignorance about what's coming at them and trying to resolve it all. And then finding a lot of people are just not capable of even addressing the most simplest stuff. It's got me just overwhelmed to even think beyond this, but I do. I look at it and say, well, is there something I can do somewhere? This is not likely, but I'm somehow wired to say, well, is there something I can throw in someplace, just even a suggestion, even if it isn't agreed to, even if it isn't accepted, like my Bundy situation. I don't know how much, or the DAPL, the DAPL, the no DAPL. All that suggestion fell on deaf ears. Absolutely zero. And so you wonder, well, if no one's going to listen, why do you keep talking? And there's a good reason about that. Maybe I shouldn't. And then a few of you guys will come, you guys and gals will show up with the email and tell me what you're doing. It's pretty impressive. Or like Rancho 42 I was talking to you last week. Actually gets it. Actually goes and researches and finds out for themselves. And if that can happen, I don't know why it isn't happening all over the place. And then when you see more of the substance, you stop talking out of opinion and your prejudice and your woundedness, and you start looking how to focus what needs to be stated in a way that no one can question it. And then, as I tell you, then there's no argument. It's not an argument. We don't have to waste time with our opinion. There's no argument. Given there's an objective basis that is found to be solid, because it's us dealing with ourselves over millennia, if not longer. Then we follow that for the time being, not make up new stuff. So Israel goes to social media, crawls around with its prejudices against people it doesn't even have a right to say, and then attacks people and puts them in positions that they are now subject to just because they were talking on social media with an opinion, and everyone's okay with that. Going through places like Google to do it, which are made for the purpose. We get the story to say, again, all this is the same week. Google has become a major threat to democracy in America. Well, I don't agree with the democracy. How can it be a threat to mob rule when it is the mob? But the sentiment is Google has become a major threat to America, not the democracy in America, to America. It actually has become a major threat to everyone. But this is what people are starting to sense. To love Google, you have to be a little bit of a monarchist. You have to have faith in the way people traditionally felt about the king, says Tim Wu, a Columbia law professor. Remember monopolies, what I said China's trying to do. Not trying, they are doing it. They're establishing the example of the monopoly for the purposes of the future digital currency at the national level. They're going to take their internal policies and they're going to then transfer their demands by the mass of people. They got billions of people, 1.5 billion of people. Their demands of those people are going to be shifted by policy. That'll allow them to you see this is happening over decades. They'll transfer the demand from that gold into the currency for settlements between nations. Gives everybody a chance to catch up. They have a plan, the people don't. The people are just wrapped around their needs. And the reason why China is important is because when they can deal with 1.5 million people and pass it on through, it will work for everybody else. Google has become a major threat to America. I'll truncate the title. We're allowing these monopolies to do and promote as they will. Don't be evil, we used to say. They don't say that anymore. I won't even go, how much more do we need to hear, unless you live under a rock, that we're being controlled by these digital things, and we can continue to choose to spend our time with them, where they monetize every click, and then they collect every piece of information, so somebody like Equifax can make more profit and exploit against you. That it's moving into a system in the future that you won't even recognize yourself when you hear yourself, because the app that you had, the phone that you have, the digital things that you've been dealing with have been constructing the virtual you, and that virtual system just uses that. You're too much trouble. Google has become a major threat in America. It's not the only one, folks. And then I think about that, and not only is all these threats, we don't recognize it. We can't even call in America, we can't even call the government, the type of government we have correct by this title, how ignorant we are from the title. There's a function that I look at. I don't care what you call it. We got a function. It doesn't seem like many people understand that. But it's not, Google is the main monopoly. That's why, because monopolies are monarchs. They control. So again, I guess I can put it in this context. No matter what you believe about anarchy or its definition, you use Google, you're not an anarchist. You agree with a monarchy. You agree with monopoly. And that's a double-edged sword, because the more we have to move around in different places, the more divided it is. In other words, I get tired of having to keep up with the next new website to make sure we're placed in the website so that we have some exposure for the broadcast. I can't keep up anymore. I'm trying to figure out a way to make it all easy, but it's just too much work. And so I'm just not going to be the guy that keeps up. I'm going to trip on the trail one day. Everyone else is going to run ahead of me, and I'm just going to die right there. It's over. So that's a double-edged sword when you start to have to diversify where you can be found. Talked about the other one about how do you find people. So monopolies are the reason why they're monopolies. They're monarchies, as this article points out, and they're very dangerous when they are in conditions and places that they actually control most of your life, or how you go through your life, or what others are going to be utilizing when you have to go to them. And if you're not seeing this threat, I don't know what to say. If you're not moving against it, I don't know what to say. If you're not helping to start systems that are going to be independent of this, or promoting those and helping those that are doing it, I don't know what to say. There's inevitabilities. There's a digital life coming. I guess the point is how much of that is going to be made up for you, and how much is not going to be able to be made up for you. And the only way the second happens is if you roll up your sleeves and engage it so that it won't. Major threats in America. I mean, we can go on and on about those. I want to revisit something here before we move on from it. Major threats. I told you that natural resources, what Mother Nature makes and what man can produce from what Mother Nature provides, is how we make it. It is a wealth. It's a value added, natural value added that can't be taxed. In particular, the United States of America, where the monarch, the king, the ruler, cannot have the property, actually, except for some small, narrow places. And the governments that were set up were supposed to protect that condition. Not that we're actually seeing that today, but it's because of these are beyond threats, actually. It's because of these certain types of policies that come down. And I want to revisit this natural resources, another style of threat, another attack by the digital system, the fiat system, the fiction system, onto natural systems. If you don't defend that line, you've lost. You'll be virtualized, and you will be treated as a U.S. consumer, and you'll be dealt with, and you'll be handed exploitation after exploitation. I've been, again, it's land of the law of the land, the property law, the grants of property for mining. It's the minerals, it's the timber for the trees. Farmers got the ranching, or the farmers got the growing of the food. The ranchers are doing other food, other types of animals, husbandry. And wherever man goes, you can see when done correctly, and interestingly, the nature of a producer is to make his environment better, given he's not miseducated, what the new education system does. Well, just go use GMOs instead of just laying your land fallow and letting the ground rebuild back up to it so the plants themselves are healthy and protect themselves. No, you can't do that. You've got to intensively chemicalize everything. That's the new normal. Let's normalize the deviance, right? Well, no, the old guy said, no, we got to work with Mother Nature here for her to produce for me. And I will take what she offers, and I'll do my best to make my environment better because of that. That you find out that man's development actually increases wildlife, increases things. It's in such a way that you can actually write laws that says you will, as an agency of the government, improve production. That should tell you something about Mother Nature and what man can do in proper development. I was going to say, the easy word to use is stewardship. No, that's a lie. That's not actually what you're doing in the context of what the agenda comes down. It's a whole different thing that we have as men and women doing and using the land and finding the production that we need, that we can do in multiples greater than ourselves so we can provide for the rest. That you see in this other thing where the international banking system doesn't want you to have that. They will attempt to destroy a nation, a government, and that nation will capitulate. And so I'm suggesting that's an example for how that works, and we should come up with alternatives. That the threat to us not only is the digital threat, but it's the one in the real world, that you have people in the government that are the threat. That people don't necessarily see on what to do about it. Governor Brown presses federal authorities for resources as Oregon wildfires grow, was a headline. I'm talking about this also in relation to, we have lots of wildfires going on in the nation. People are now, this is the year you're supposed to see, nice sunny days and hot days, and I don't know. I don't think we've seen the sun now I'm seeing it for the first time today after maybe a month, minimum, maybe 2 months, because of all the smoke in the sky, based on these new policies. The threat to America is this threat that the people in the offices of government are running an agenda to work you out of your life, your livelihood and your life, and do what they believe, they believe they're do-gooders, saving things that they want you to do. Well, this headline was kind of interesting. I don't even know if many people understood it. Governor Brown presses federal authorities for resources as Oregon wildfires go. I'm just going to let you know without reading the story. Governor Brown sits on a consensus-based group that accepts a forest management policy that allows for these fires. that presses for their use, even in wildfire season. And when you do some research on that policy, you find out, as I said last week, you have insane arsonists. The policy which the government and the state government and the federal government agree is sound wildfire policy is the use of wildfire to burn the forest and to make education systems that will get you to agree to those unintended consequences caused by the use of that highest risk method. They say this all in the documentation. It's a bit disingenuous in the title that Governor Brown presses federal authorities for resources when they're going to tell her no. And why? Because she's agreed to it. Her and her cronies have agreed to this. And how? Because everybody believes that that system is how you're supposed to go through things, and they put fire ecology, the actual science of fire ecology, on the back burner, or just pick through the bones of it, and utilized it to do this wilding condition. The headline says that this progressive governor, this governor who actually is the cause of the fires, is actually asking for resources that won't come to her, but it makes her sound good, doesn't it? It's kind of like my problem with Ron Paul. He could be considered Dr. No, but he knew that even by saying no to an appropriations bill that included money to his district, he'd get that money. He could say no 100% of the time, and he'd still get money into his district. So there's a slight deception about that. That's a major deception. It's the same problem I see here. Oh, she's pressing for resources. They're going to tell her no, and they did tell her no eventually. But she's already agreed to the policy that allows your lands to burn. That if I could get a few people to understand that and show them how this works, we may not see this in the near future, pretty quickly. But the threat to us is these people in the office, and I hear nothing but either crickets or I hear complaints or what are you going to do, go into the system? No, you out the system. You do it with knowledge. I did some preliminary checking about this forest policy, about the science that was done back in the 60s. I found out even the Howard Biswell was saying prescription fires can be used, but he said them in a very particular state that they have now unleashed. They don't even have the particular condition that he was using them for. And he admitted then there was no real understanding, that there would be more experiments needed to be done to fully understand this tool. As a tool, not a method of forwarding an agenda of wilding. In other words, getting you out of production of the forest and destroying the watershed so you had to move away from it. The threats to our lives are all based in the same kinds of methods. It doesn't matter if I go digital, if I go into this fictional world, or I go to these people that are in office that are actually affecting us in real time, in real life. The method of the plunder is clearly discernible. And the answer to it in every case is to identify that it's there, find the objective basis, and stick that back in their face, and call them the criminals that they are. And then if there's enough of you, maybe we can bring the mass of the people to bring that so-called liberty that we're never supposed to leave from. Because as long as we are, we're moving back to that global arena where some country like China can rule your life in the future. Not that it will do it directly. It did it through its policies. It did it through all of its policies that were allowed to it to do, that the people like the banks that went into Uruguay could shut down a country like Uruguay. And the people sit there all looking at each other because they're not creative enough to figure it out. And I don't know that I had an answer, but I have a suggestion. And I don't know if that suggestion would go farther than that, what I've just told you, but it seems to me if there's a medium of exchange, I don't care what used to be puka shells, as I understand in Hawaii, that used to be a medium of exchange. As long as you trust it, it doesn't really matter. Those that continue to trust Equifax, Google, China, IMF, any of these people, and continue to stay in the systems that they are controlling, like Uruguay is still involved in, and not have a creative, real answer to that. I was going to say solution, but those solutions network is the demise of your response, your accurate response. That you don't have that response and become self-reliant, you are subject. Brown presses federal authorities for resources. She's pressing a false condition. She's a false hero, creating a false enemy when the whole thing is one big evil enemy. They've agreed to this in the policy considerations through that consensus process I keep telling you is a felony against all of you. Most likely all of the fires are based on this 1995 policy, which they claim is sound science, and it's not. Anybody who just does a quick perusal of the policy will see that for themselves. And I see and hear hardly anybody in the seats of decision that went there first, or anybody that would be doing research to find out why they're having their family members go to the hospital, or why they have to breathe this smoke, or why any of it is going on, why they haven't gotten to the root cause and found out where the problems are more than just use their opinion and their whining. It is just a fascination to me. That the threats that we can identify are none that we address. Well, why don't we address it? And why do we make excuses that nothing can't be addressed when we sit there and twiddle our thumbs and sit in our prejudicial excuse? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point. See, the thing about what I'm saying on some of this is I'm not saying about what I believe, because to tell you the truth, fire ecology, I really had never been trained in. Oh yeah, I've fought some forest fires, this and that, done all that. I've been a firefighter. I understand fire. I know the basics of it, but I've never really done it for any length of time and really looked at it. Never went down and measured stuff. Never had to create the tools for measurement and accurately apply it and retest the theories and really check it out and delineate. I've never done any of that stuff. I can talk with people who have, and I get a fairly fair idea about what it takes and what the standards are. But if you don't have that in you, then you don't understand what best science is. You can be vulnerable to a lie. Just as I didn't understand, but I went to go read pretty quickly. Within about 20 minutes, I had a good idea of where the lie is and how it continues. That I think, well, we've actually started to destroy that. That we can be duped. We can put our faith in people and things. Like I said, the experts say last week, reality is not what experts say, was the title of last week's broadcast. Reality is not what experts say. And so we have to go find out what it is. And when you find out the underlying things an objective basis is faulty, you then have to go find what that objective basis. It's not about what I believe. It's not about what I feel. There is some of that in there, but what I feel is I don't like the smoke and breathing the smoke, and I see a law that says it's not supposed to be happening that way. It doesn't mean that fire and stuff will go away. Things happen. We aren't perfect in our management. I don't mean managing fire to burn, I mean managing the forest to produce. And so it's not what I feel, or I'm asking anybody to feel for themselves. I'm saying we have a major problem and we have a bunch of people deceiving us. Let's go find the objective basis. And that takes out most all subjective belief of how I'm affected for my sake. We literally remove ourselves from the equation at all points. That's why the black and white is so critical. The problem with the newer black and white in the last 40 years, it's been adulterated. But that's really not in the law, actually. That's all in the policies. And then you get these criminals in those agency decisions that make their decisions and we'll agree to disagree. Well, they don't have an authority to disagree to the objective basis. And so we have to move the next step to call them out for the criminals that they are. And then we have to work and we find out that the system is so broken we can't get accountability. Now that's your real problem. The first problem, though, is getting the objective basis, getting yourself outside of the problem. Don't make yourself with the problem. You are affected by what's going on, but you don't get emotional about it. Why? Because when you get emotional, you can be screaming at each other all day long and never get anywhere. Well, when you write it in a piece of paper and it's been agreed, that's the way the law works. That's where you start and you end right there until you get it worked out different. So there's nothing about us and for our sake that we're even doing this other than it's not working right. We're being harmed now. And we're being duped by these people. They play themselves up to be something and they're not. The governor plays herself up to be somebody that's doing the best for Oregon, and this Brown is not. I've got proofs about it. I won't go on and on. I'm repeating myself all the time. You know the proofs. I just gave you another one. The process that they agreed to that I'll just stop. I've said it already. She's another threat. She's coming into color of authority to do something that she has no real authority to do, that she's lying about what she's done, that the media says contrary to what the actual fact of the point is. And that leads me to this thing about being duped and the processes of agenda that come through. And we see the globalization threat that we're under, and it comes in many different forms. We're duped by people who promote themselves to be other than what they are. Another story pops up regarding this, the condition that we've been seeing that's been Charleston. You see this thing called Antifa and this thing called the national supremacist groups. And then we find this little story busted. Another white nationalist leader was once active in Occupy movement. Are we seeing a trend here? First, Jason Kessler of Unite the Right is revealed to have been involved in Occupy movement, and now another white nationalist has been discovered to have been made the same political leap. I've told you, folks, and I wrote this in the Twitter. I told a long time, how long has it been? I said, don't go out and riot in the streets. You're going to be played and you're going to be set up. This was writing on the wall decades ago. I said, don't go there. Turn your attention inwards and go into black and white. And hopefully you do it the more proper way. You feed information, and you're not the one doing any arguing at any meeting. You're actually feeding the law information to people and keeping those people that are making decisions on track. But here we have these people that are jumping from one place to the next. We find out that both of the sides are being paid off by the same agents. If they're not FBI action, they're external, like Soros-style payments. Why would you subject yourself to that? Why would you buy into that? Is it really surprising that someone so-called busted? Are people that so-called busted them so clueless to understand that that was the plan to have happen, that this is happening all the time? It's probably happened before and they just didn't catch it. That's the interesting thing about possibly this internet. It can give us a bunch of really fast run-up on how we identify people. But the threat to us is that we engage this nonsense. Remember, I said, don't go toward unity. What did they say? This is Unite the Right. I can change the E on unite to Y. That's unity, folks. Don't move to anybody promoting unity. Work non-dependently on your thing you need to make right, and hopefully you look around and find people working in the same direction so that you can't be taken out as a group, even when you're working behind the scenes. Do not go to unity. How many podcasts have I explained that unity is the UN agenda, the NGO agenda that sets up your demise? Is the same thing that this governor's consensus is, unity's consensus, that destroys this whole thing that allows the media to make her look like a hero, and she's a villain in all of this. And the forests still burn, and the animals still die. It was astonishing. I was listening to a radio report. Someone said that they did a study. They said that it was 22 animals per acre die in these fires. And then they were talking about a fire that was 500,000 acres. They talk about a current fire going on. It's burning again. The first fire that burnt is burning again. With those numbers applied, there's 3 million animals die. Four-legged animals are dead. Doesn't count the birds or anything else. It counts the four-legged animals. 3 million animals are dead due to these types of unity supporting people. That we see here, these people are jumping back and forth, so-called political. It's not, folks. It's an agenda. These are the tools. It's not politics at all. This is like an American spring. This is the American battlefield spring. This is the government itself fortifying people that support the division in this country. They come in all different places and shapes and sizes and excuses. And that's part of the confusion. But for someone like myself, I said, they're transparent to you. They're not transparent to me. If you can't see them yet, why don't you listen to me and I'll point them out and you find something that's important for you, and then I'll direct you on how you continue to identify them and where they're going to go and how we head them off. If you had not got involved with this white nationalist nonsense and this Charlotte thing, with the action that the media is on, you wouldn't have been persuaded into the fact, and you'd say, oh, that, I already told you that it was, but you'd see for yourself. That's a setup. We don't want to lose time on that. We'll move over to where we need to actually be. We won't let that persuade us. Because we're being duped at every turn unless we're on something that we're doing that we know that doesn't necessarily, isn't the cause of a unity before it gets moving. There might be a unification of effort after you've started your non-dependent action to stop the wrong you want to make right. You may find others that are believing in your same cause and have the same research base and the same foundation in law and in temperaments that all work together. That's not the unity we're talking. That's you finding allies. When you start out a process of unity, I've been telling you that's the foreign agenda coming to destroy you. So you all that think that you're alt-right, alt-left, Nazi, this, that you want to talk about your identity, you want to support white whatever or black whatever, you're just all part of the problem. Your mind is being driven by an external force that you haven't perceived yet. It's using your fallen nature against you. And I tend to believe, as I see it all the time, when you stop that and you start focusing on a cause, a singular cause, and you start putting time into that, all that other stuff becomes non-important. And you, just by nature of your focus, laser beam, intending and persisting to accomplish the goal you've set, will eliminate a lot of this in our lives. And you don't have time for it all. And until I see that, I got to talk a little bit about it to explain how it's still you're giving your time to it. So we're given over to being duped. We're given over to this condition of being lied to. We can make up all kinds of stories around it. We can come up with all our opinions. And then over time we become observant and we start seeing these little problems that threaten us that really didn't appear before. And we are told, again, the color of authority. We're told of things and promoted things that aren't so. People present themselves as not being who they aren't. And I want to now move ourselves. It's just like the fractal. You go over the governor down to one little guy who misrepresents himself in a movement that's going to just threaten you and destroy you because you buy into it, to the governor of the state who does the same thing, to policies in the nation that do the same thing, and then you find out the head bully, the United States, like I said, is tied with all of this that we're talking about today. The United States, we find out now, if we didn't know it before, is us. The United States is the terrorist. It's coming out again. For all y'all that just don't want to get this, and even if you did, that you don't realize how extenuating all these influence happen to your way of life where you are, that you have to pick something to fight against. It looks so distant, but from the lonely man that dupes you all the way to the government duping you, it's a fractal to my mind. The United States aircraft evacuates over 20 Daesh commanders from Ez-Zor, says a source as reported by Sputnik News. A military and diplomatic source has told Sputnik that a United States Air Force plane had evacuated Daesh, ISUS band in Russia, field the commanders from Deir ez-Zor. The United States-led coalition denied the allegations. Well, they did it twice, folks. First, they took out 2 commanders of European origination, and then the next time they came in, they took out over 20 Daesh and their families out of an area that the Syrian army has now taken back control of, this Deir ez-Zor. It was a 3-year hold. They finally broke the siege there. Assad's really doing a job with his army are doing really a job with Assad there, and the Russians helping. That we find out the United States again is supporting is us, the terrorists. And no, we're being duped again. More evidence of that dupingness. U.S., we have very little to do with Syria other than killing ISIS. What Trump said a day later or two. That's a complete lie if you're picking up ISIS and hauling them back to the northern reaches over the Euphrates. Can't happen, folks. Can't be consistent. What is it in us that continues to agree with this whole condition going on in Syria? And I see the importance, notwithstanding the fact that we're destroying the same democracy that they have. You want to call it their democracy. They are supposed to be a sovereign nation. You're seeing like Uruguay wasn't. Syria's not, because we have this big bully in the world called the United States that will lie at every turn and misrepresent itself. No different than the governor did or this little guy on the street. It's a big fractal to me. Okay, where you go with this thing, the deception is the same. While we're evacuating the commanders, Trump is saying we have little to do but kill them people. Something's not the truth. One of those stories is not the truth, folks. And then same thing coming in, wondering about how this all has been going on underneath our noses. A journalist comes out and says 350 diplomatic flights carry weapons for terrorists. Azerbaijan's Silkway Airlines transport weapons with diplomatic clearance for Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Congo. And so what happened? This journalist gets attacked, held, and then interrogated over this report. That they're using diplomatic flights to ferry people and weapons between all these places. How much more what story doesn't fit here, folks? Which one do we use as the truth now? And if we back off from that, then I'm saying you're defective at some level, because you're going to do that with the trouble that is right around you in these very substantial problems. If you're not going to find something private to you to be important enough to fight, what will you fight for? What can you expect? We find more information. It just comes out media propaganda. The Intercept. I've had a problem with this group and all the people that promote around it. The Intercept mistranslates an Assad speech to decry what Assad is doing. And if you read even when you read how they describe it, they couldn't have come to the conclusion that Assad was anything good. Why would the Intercept be finding on the side of the United States that denies supporting terrorists that it's ferrying out the commanders, but ferrying in weapons that they deny? And yet comes out in the truth. How much more stories are we telling ourselves about all this? How much more dupable are we going to be and continue to allow these stories to not show us the notice of our failure that says we have to get involved, even if it's down to our credit score. Even if it's down to this exploitation by these companies that consider you're a consumer and you didn't even deal with them ever. How did that happen? That's our problem. That's their plan. What you going to do about it? Thank you for tuning in today. Hope something I said will inspire you to continue to research and find that wrong you need to make right. Grimner, thank you very much for all you do at reallibertymedia.com, archives, blogcaster page, all the management, freedomsnetwork.com, social network, small one there, working on getting people together. Bo Diddy and Grimner working that out. And we got Jules over at ucy.tv. Thank you very much. Appreciate your podcast, pastcast, and the recast on Thursday. And you can terrestrial broadcasters, all wherever you are, thank you very much. I'll be here next week, tech diffs and nature willing.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Well, that's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.